She thought it was just another evening in her own neighborhood, nothing unusual until the knock on the door. In minutes, a simple disagreement turned into flashing lights, raised voices, and an accusation that cut much deeper than a fine on paper. What began as a petty HOA complaint quickly revealed something far uglier, a reminder that, in some places, the rules aren't applied equally to everyone. How could standing her ground over $90 spiral into a confrontation that exposed the true face of prejudice? For my wife, the neighborhood was supposed to be a place of peace. After long days of work, she found comfort in her garden. The small rows of flowers she tended with care, and the quiet walks we'd take in the evenings. To her, home meant safety, belonging, and the freedom to breathe without judgment. But not everyone shared that view. Behind the tidy lawns and polite smiles, there were unspoken rules. Rules that seemed to shift depending on who you were. She noticed the stares, the whispered comments, the scrutiny that never seemed to fall on anyone else. At first, she brushed it off, determined not to give it power. But one homeowner, the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA, had been watching closely, waiting for a chance to pounce, and soon that chance came. The letter came first. Folded neatly, slipped into the mailbox, stamped with the HOA's seal of authority. A $90 fine for a so-called violation. My wife read it twice, her hands tightening with each line. The offense? A flower bed that was not in compliance. The same flower bed she tended with love, the same one neighbors praised when walking by. It wasn't about flowers, not really. It was about control, and about her. She let it sit on the counter for days, unwilling to dignify it with a payment. Why should she? Others had chipped paint, weeds creeping through cracks, porches thick with clutter. No one else had letters. No one else had fines. The silence gave way to unease. Every time she walked outside, she felt eyes following, lingering, measuring, judging. The kind of watchful gaze that made your skin crawl, not because of what was said, but because of what was silently promised. Days later, the knock came again. This time, loud, forceful. On the porch stood the enforcer herself, the neighbor everyone called a Karen in hushed tones. Clipboard in hand, lips pursed as though the very sight of my wife's face was an offense. She recited her line, "Pay or face consequences." My wife stood her ground, calm, firm, unshaken. She refused to hand over $90 to someone who had already taken enough. The comfort of home, the dignity of peace, and that single word, no, was all it took. What should have ended there instead became a spectacle. Within an hour, squad car lights flickered against our windows, red and blue dancing across the walls of the house we had fought so hard to call our own. Karen had called the police, her voice no doubt trembling with exaggerated fear, painting herself as the victim of a threat. The message was clear. She believed her word would outweigh my wife's humanity. The officers arrived with that cautious tension that spoke louder than their words. They scanned her, not the yard. They measured her responses, not the supposed fine. Standing there, an ordinary woman in her own driveway, she felt the weight of generations pressing down. The accusation didn't need details. In their eyes, it could be solid enough. Neighbors peeked between blinds, whispering. Phones snapped photos. In those seconds, it wasn't about a flower bed at all. It was about who the neighborhood had decided didn't belong. But while Karen expected submission, something else simmered. My wife held herself taller, her jaw set, her gaze unflinching. They demanded compliance. She offered only truth. The questions grew sharper, the tone colder, their presence carrying the threat of escalation. One wrong step, one misinterpreted gesture, and the night could have turned into a headline. And yet, just when it seemed the scales were tipping out of her favor, when Karen smirked with the confidence of someone who thought she'd already won, my wife reached for something Karen had never accounted for, something that would shatter the script of how this was supposed to play out. The air felt heavier than it should have, thick with authority and suspicion. The officers shifted their weight, hands resting close to their belts, eyes narrowing as though my wife's very existence demanded justification. She stood in her own driveway, accused of non-compliance as if it were a crime worthy of flashing lights. Around her, the neighbors gathered, some curious, others eager to see her humbled. Karen's arms were crossed, her smug smile suggesting she had already won. The questions came sharp, almost accusatory. Why didn't you pay the fine? Why refuse a lawful order? Each word dripped with the assumption that she was in the wrong, that her voice carried less weight automatically. My wife answered calmly, but her pulse raced beneath her steady tone. She had seen this story play out before, and in too many cases it ended with tragedy. One officer stepped closer, trying to tower over her. The crowd went quiet. It was as if everyone was waiting for her to break, to stumble, to give them a reason. And for a moment, fear pierced her confidence, because she knew that in these encounters, the rules were never written in her favor. A wrong glance, a trembling hand, even silence could be twisted into defiance. Then she made her move, not desperate, but deliberate. From her bag, she produced her own badge. The atmosphere jolted. The same officers who had positioned themselves as her judges froze in uncertainty. A hush swept across the street, cutting through the whispers and Karen's satisfied laughter. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. Her credentials spoke louder than their suspicion. Higher rank, greater authority, undeniable proof that everything Karen had spun was hollow. Karen's face drained as reality struck. The smirk dissolved. What she thought was a weapon, her accusation, had backfired spectacularly. And in that moment, the question hung heavy in the air. When the truth is undeniable, will justice finally follow, or will the crowd still pretend not to see? The street that had moments earlier buzzed with whispers and flashing lights fell into silence. The officers, now uneasy, stepped back. Their tone shifted, halting and respectful where before it had been sharp and accusatory. But the damage was already done. My wife didn't need an apology. She needed something they could never give back, the simple dignity of being treated as human in the first place. Karen shrank into the background, her smugness replaced with the hollow realization that her power crumbled. The second truth stepped into the light. The crowd dispersed slowly, but the memory of what they had seen lingered. For my wife, the victory was not sweet. It was heavy, because she knew this could have gone differently, and for too many people it does. The badge saved her that night. But what about the ones who carry no badge? What about the countless stories silenced before they can even be told? That's the weight of racism. It isn't just in the blatant slurs or direct violence. It's in the everyday suspicion, the weaponized accusations, the assumption that blackness or brownness itself is a crime. It's in the way power tilts, giving some the benefit of the doubt while stripping it from others, forcing them to prove their innocence before they've even been named guilty. As she closed the door behind her that night, the house no longer felt safe in the same way. It became clearer than ever that this wasn't just about a fine or even about Karen. It was about a system that too often rewards prejudice and punishes presence. So I'll leave you with this. How many more lives must be disrupted? How many more families shaken before equality isn't something that has to be proven, but something finally lived?